we on? Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Okay. Welcome, everyone, to our December 13th, 2022 Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District Board meeting. The first item is to call this meeting to order in our Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with
indivisible,
liberty and justice
with liberty
for all.
and justice for all.
Yeah, I did. All right. So our first item on our agenda is public comment. If there's anyone here who wishes to address the Board of Managers, an item not on the agenda or on the consent agenda, you can come forward at this time. And I'm not seeing anybody that's not here. Other people are here for the agenda. So with that, we're going to move on to our public hearing, which is our 2023 budget and levy. I would ask for a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Moved by Frank, second by Christian. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, and motion carried 5-0. Okay, so we're going to have our district administrator give us a brief update on our budget, and after she's done, we'll see if there's any public comment, and after that, we'll be looking at some resolutions. So, Manager Giese.
So President Loney and managers, in September, the Board of Managers certified a preliminary levy in the amount of $1,998,594, which represented a 8.1% levy increase from 2022. Subsequent to September, staff has been working to update the budget, and we have updated it to reflect more recent understanding of estimated 2023 costs, and in addition to also reflecting some additional anticipated interest income. In addition, discussions with the board in the November workshop indicated the board had an interest in reducing our debt reserve line item for 2023 by $20,000. So with the revised budget estimates and with a $20,000 reduction in the debt reserve, the current proposed levy now is reflecting a 3.8% increase over 2022. So staff is recommending that the Board of Managers adopt Resolution 22-362 for the 2023 budget in the amount of $2,473,100. In addition, staff also recommends the adoption of Resolution 22-363, certifying the final 2023 administrative and metropolitan water management tax levy in the amount of $1,919,936. This levy is comprised of an amount of $249,200 for the general fund and $1,670,736 for the implementation fund.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to address the board at this time on anything on the budget? I'm not seeing any. I guess I'll bring it back here first. Is there any questions for Joni on her presentation by the board? Any questions? Any questions? Not seeing any. Okay. I would recommend that we have a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Moved by Frank.
Second?
Second by Ben. Any other discussion? No discussion I'm seeing. So all in favor of closing the public hearing, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried 5-0. So we're going to look at adopting our 2023 budget. And I would like to, first of all, just thank staff for really working hard. When we started out in September 15th, we have to declare a total dollar amount, a maximum amount, and then we could work, we said we would work to see how we could trim that budget or get it to a point that we felt was more, not reasonable, but as tight as we could. And staff did that. I appreciate that. And we are still doing, we have a lot of items for alum treatments, future alum treatments, upper watershed projects, website development. We're going to be fully staffed. We're going to be getting more involved in permitting. And a flare chloride study, we looked into that. We got that in there. Plus, we were able to tackle inflation and make those additions as needed. So I'm very, I think staff did an excellent job. So I think we would need to adopt Resolution 22-362, which is adopting the 2023 budget as recommended by staff. It's green.
I move Resolution 22-364. Excuse me,
362.
correction, 362, getting my resolutions fouled up, to indicate option B, which is a 3.8% increase, a total budget of $2,473,100.
Second?
Okay, we have a motion by Frank, second by Christian. Is there any other further discussion on the resolution? Okay, not seeing any, I assume you're ready to vote. So all in favor of the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carried 5-0. So now we need a resolution adoption of 22-363, which is certifying the final 2023 administrative and metropolitan water management tax levy. Do I hear a motion?
I'll move that as well, 22-363. Again, choosing option B, as we discussed earlier, final levy amount being $1,919,936.
Second?
Second by Christian?
Yep.
Okay, we have a motion by Frank, second by Christian on resolution 22-363. Any other further discussion? I'm not seeing any, so I assume you're ready to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. The budget is approved. Now we're going to look at approval of the agenda. Is there any additions, corrections, deletions from staff? Nothing from staff? Is there anything from the managers? Not seeing any. A motion to approve the agenda? Motion made by Matt. Yes.
Second.
Second by Frank. Okay, all in favor of approval of the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
And opposed, the motion carried 5-0. So now we're going to get into our old and new business programs and project updates. Whoever has that from staff, go ahead.
Yes, so the first item in the projects and programs update is typically water levels. We've transitioned to ice cover, and at this point, our lakes are all iced over. Some dates to note here are Upper Prior Lake had one of the earliest ice overs in our records since before at least 2001. And Spring and Lower Prior Lake were similar to 2014. Our carp management update involves district staff out on the edges of the lakes tracking carp. We've noticed an aggregation in the north central part of Upper Prior Lake. This aggregation is in a spot that we've done obstruction removals in the past, and we're projected to get out there later this week and next week to test out some new removal techniques and equipment. So hopefully we'll have interesting findings for next month. The thin ice is going to be a little prohibitive on the type of equipment that we can get out there. So this will be kind of new ground for us, which is exciting. We have received our 2022 lake water quality results and have performed our initial analysis. This is just, I'm going to cover some high-level seasonal average data here. We'll have more to come with when we update the water quality report cards. To start off here, Lower Prior Lake is continuing to meet state water quality standards. And these, I'll go over the next, some of our Tier 1 lakes, and all the graphs will be the same. But what to note here is that dotted line on the top is going to be the Secchi disc transparency state standard. Beneath, and then the bars going down is how far the Secchi disc is in the water column, and on the right you can see the depth. That red dotted line is the total phosphorus state standard, and the green line is the state chlorophyll standard. These will change with shallow and deep lakes, but in general, we're looking at that far right side where the 2022 graphs are indicative of the water quality. So Lower Prior Lake is doing well. Upper Prior Lake is also doing well. It's meeting its 3 state standards.
Wow.
Spring Lake has declined since last year. It is not meeting its Secchi disc transparency or chlorophyll A, but it is meeting the total phosphorus standard. Fish Lake is not meeting any of the 3 standards. Something to note on Fish Lake is that it has been sort of hovering near the state standard for quite some time.
Hey, Jeff, can you go back to Spring Lake?
Yep.
Is the total phosphorus standard there 60 versus Fish Lake was 40? Did I see that right? On phosphorus?
Yes. That is correct. Spring Lake does have, and what's the correct word here? Carl, can you help me out? It's a site-specific
Spring Lake
standard.
is a site-specific standard. Normally, it is considered a deep lake, but the district pursued consideration of a site-specific standard that looked back at the historic average pre-settlement and concentration in the lake, and the argument was made that it should be treated similar to a shallow lake at 60, and the state agreed.
Yep. Yeah, good catch, Bruce. The last of the Tier 1 lakes here is Pike Lake, and we sort of treat it as 2 lakes. It's 2 very distinct basins. On the left, you'll see an aerial photo, and the blue line is where the Prior Lake outlet channel enters and then exits the lake. And this is kind of a very distinct reason why the lake is sort of a tale of 2 lakes. The top graph is the west, and has been historically pretty good water quality, as it's mostly just what exits Lower Prior Lake, and Pike Lake East on the right there has been historically pretty poor water quality. So, like I mentioned earlier, we'll update the lake report cards and have that available on our website as well as these graphs, and do a little bit more trend analysis. Okay, moving into the monitoring minute, this is where this district staff get to talk about current or future projects and describe some how monitoring kind of can impact and influence and provide a benefit to the district. So in June of 2020, Upper Prior Lake had an alum treatment and completed its 60% recommended total dose. The idea was to get 5 years minimum with the first application, 5 years of water quality benefit. And alum, in a nutshell, is applied through a barge on the lake, and it precipitates and flocks and settles on the bottom where it more or less binds phosphorus, and it also captures phosphorus release in the sediment. So what's the next step here? Since the initial dose was at 60%, there's 3 main steps in considering what to do next. It's to monitor surface and bottom water quality, conduct sediment coring, and then there's an engineering aspect, which is recalculating or looking into future dosing rates. So this is similar to the graphs I just mentioned. Highlighted in that red box is when the Upper Prior Lake alum treatment occurred. Looking at previous years, you can see it made a dramatic increase or benefit to the water quality, and it's still pretty solid water quality, meeting surface water goals, which is what our state standards are based against. Now moving into the bottom hypolimnion layer of the lake, this is generally where total phosphorus concentrations are quite a bit higher. In this table up to the right, Steve McComas built for the district in 2017. It's kind of a recommendation, a guide, you could say, to help with decision making. So this graph just basically shows that the bottom total phosphorus concentrations were extremely high. In this graph, the orange represents bottom, which is taken at just above the sediment, and the blue dots represent the surface water quality. You'll see that the order of magnitude is very high, greater than 10. So this, according to the table, shows that something is going on. And, anybody recreating or using or living on the lake would have told you that based on the algal blooms and other water quality issues. So looking at 2020, when the alum treatment occurred, you'll see that on the graph that there was a dramatic benefit to the water quality and reduction in bottom total phosphorus. You'll see this year it's got a little bit of a creep up, which is expected, especially noting that it was a 60% dose. But according to this table, it's not really an issue at this point. So the surface average was right around 23 micrograms per liter. The bottom was right around 70 micrograms per liter. So no problem. And to look into, how to decide next steps, we can use Spring Lake as an example. In 2013, Spring Lake was dosed with 50% recommended dose. And then in 2018 and 2020, the following 2 quarters were completed. You'll notice a trend in 2014, 15, 16, 17 of rising phosphorus and chlorophyll. And then again in 2019, and you'll see that again in 2021 and 2022. So alum works really well. It might need additional applications. Christian, yes. Manager Markenberg.
If you go back to that previous graph, please, with the Spring Lake measure.
This?
Yep. So the dosing in 2018 and 20 of alum, was that 25%, since the first one was 50%?
25% of the initial recommended,
Yes.
yes.
Yep. So the first was 50%, the next 2 were half of that each.
Correct.
Yep, thank you.
Yep. So looking at the bottom of the lake, the total concentrations at the bottom, it's really interesting what the data will tell you. So in 2014, the alum treatment reduced that lake bottom total phosphorus dramatically. And then you'll see that creep up in 2015, 16, and 17, and then in 2018, again, it was applied, and in 2020, it brought that total phosphorus at the bottom of the lake back down to very low levels. Comparing that to Upper Prior Lake, you'll see the same thing, but you'll also see in 2021 and 2022 that there wasn't that rise, that post-treatment rise. So going back to that first slide, I mentioned that there was a life expectancy of at least 5 years. So at the moment, we're seeing that expectation. So what's the next tool that we can use? It's sediment coring can help determine what that phosphorus release in the sediment is doing, and that's what's also being what the alum is also taking up. That's not just what's in the water column, but what's being released from the lake bottom sediment. And there is a number that you can determine from these cores, and it's 300 milligrams per kilogram, which I don't know how to use that, but it's what the scientists use. Something to look at in cores is sedimentation. When sedimentation is over 6 centimeters, where the previous alum treatment was, it could be cause for concern. At the moment, with our treatment being only 2 years ago, there's not a huge concern, but coring can tell us what sort of sedimentation is occurring, and it is something to consider. That picture in the center, that white layer is what the flock looks like on the lake bottom. And another question that coring can tell us is, will that remaining 40% dose be appropriate, or should it be adjusted? So that'll be used by the engineers to make recommendations on what sort of application rate would occur. So our next step at the moment are to wait out for water quality data through 2023, conduct sediment coring in the future, so later than 2023 data. So the recommendation would be to do coring in open water. And the next, something to just consider here is that Our Upper Prior Lake alum treatment was funded through Bowser Grant, and they have we have an assurance requirement to meet a 10-year effective life. And then based on some of these other data that we're seeing, is Spring Lake, should Spring Lake be a consideration? It's just kind of interesting. That's the monitoring minute. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them now.
Any questions for staff? I would just have maybe one. So are we looking at we're not looking at doing cores in 2023. We're looking at cores in 2024. Are we going to do them for both Spring Lake and Upper Prior?
I mean, correct, that we are not looking at cores in 2023 at the moment, maybe 2024 or beyond. And whether that's done on both lakes would be up to monitoring data at the end of 2023. At this point, it's more of a observation.
Okay. From the data that I saw, Spring Lake is coming up more than Upper Prior. Is that right?
That's right. So something that when I was kind of suggesting and talking with Joni, this was going to be a discussion more along the lines of Upper Prior Lake and doing some data mining. It just shows that's not always what you expect when you're looking at data. You find something new to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Christian, you have a question?
Yes, Jeff, I just want to say it was an excellent presentation. It was clear and practical, so so you can actually understand the alum application. And I think our watershed district is one of the leaders in this type of management, where you are addressing the in-lake pollution. And I can only say by talking to people on Upper Prior Lake and Spring Lake that they very, very much appreciate the effort and the alum treatments. At the same time, we have to make sure we work on all the other things that addresses the phosphorus that comes into the lakes. And as we know, Spring Lake is the first one that receives most of the excess phosphorus. So, and that's what our Upper Watershed Management Plan is all about. But thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, we're going to keep going here with some projects.
All right, I'll jump into some updates on Upper Watershed projects and some others in the following slides. So in general, on our Upper Watershed projects, we negotiated a contract with a real estate specialist. We are working to secure the signature on that contract. Should be wrapping up early next year, hopefully. The Sutton Lake Iron Enhanced Sand Filter, we will need to move forward with performing a feasibility assessment on an alternative site or continuing to follow up with the landowners' concerns and goals for that initial feasibility location. On the Spring West Iron Enhanced Sand Filter, we are continuing discussions with Scott County to understand their development plans for the future corridor and road project, roadway alignment there. We also plan to reinitiate landowner discussions once we understand the county's plans. The Buck Wetland Enhancement has had several landowner meetings this fall. Sorry, we just had one, mixing up my projects here. On November 1st, there were property owners from both the east and west sides of that project. We received feedback on draft feasibility scenarios, and we need to follow up with some additional landowner outreach, as well as we will be submitting that draft feasibility study to DNR for comments. The Sutton Lake Management Plan Had 2 landowner meetings this year, and the most recent one was in November. That draft plan has been brought to board workshops this year and has been submitted to the DNR for review and comments. We are still waiting for those comments and are planning to prepare a final draft based on those for submittal to the managers for approval, hopefully in January, pending those comments. Both the Buck and the Ditch 13 chemical treatment systems are proposed to move forward in 2024 for feasibility studies. Finally, the 2 projects that we are moving forward with on the Bowser watershed-based implementation funding are the Swamp Lake Iron Enhanced Sand Filter and the Fish Lake Management Plan update. The Swamp Lake Plan was a adjustment to the original grant work plan that was approved by the conveners, and we have drafted a work plan and budget for Swamp Lake Iron Enhanced Sand Filter as well as the Fish Lake Management Plan update, and we'll be working on submitting those to Bowser for approval in December. And if those budget requests are approved, we are planning to move forward with submitting the work plan in January. Finally, the flood detention projects has been an ongoing effort, as mentioned in the board workshop. We've prepared a draft list of potential projects. Staff has refined the recommendations of evaluation criteria based on CAC and Board of Managers feedback. Our next steps are to move forward with initial landowner outreach on the 2 priority projects identified in the board workshop, Project 6 and 1, and to move those forward to a feasibility study should the funding in the budget allow and landowner feedback is positive. There's also a note here that there is some MPCA funding that could be applied for, and that would be done early January. Any questions?
Any questions? Not seeing any. Christian, do you have a question?
No, I just want to say thank you for the presentation and welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, is that it for programs and projects then? Right? Okay, so let's move on to our item 4.2, which is the 2022 Watercraft Inspections Report. And it's by Waterfront Restorations. And welcome.
Board of Managers, if you don't mind, I'll give them a quick introduction. Each summer, the district contracts our boat inspectors to monitor our lakes and each of their launches to protect against the spread of aquatic invasive species. And today we have Ben Brandt and Derek Lee here from Waterfront Restoration to present this year's boat inspection annual report summary.
Okay.
Thank you, and good evening, Board. As Shauna said, my name is Ben Brandt. I'm the Operations Manager at Waterfront Restoration, and my day-to-day responsibilities are to oversee all of our watercraft inspection programs and inspectors out in the field. My coworker here tonight is Derek Lee. He is our account manager, and I will be presenting the summary of our season out in the Watershed District. In your board packet, there's a 36-page report that I prepared for you guys with all of the data that was collected from the inspections that were completed over the season. For the meeting tonight, I boiled it down to a 12-slide presentation for you. So, to start with a high-level overview, we completed 905 hours of Level 1 watercraft inspector coverage at Upper Prior Lake, Lower Prior Lake, Spring Lake, and Fish Lake launches. We interviewed, hired, trained, staffed, and managed 10 different inspectors throughout the season. We started our season on May 13th, which was the Saturday of fishing opener, and concluded on October 2nd. An important aspect of our scheduling throughout the season involved the partnership and collaboration within the Minnesota DNR's inspector schedule. So the DNR would schedule their inspectors, level 1 and level 2 inspectors, primarily at Lower Prior Lake Launch, as well as some shift at Upper Prior Lake Launch. They would share their schedule with Shauna. Shauna would share it with me, and then I would adjust my staffing so that we never had one of our waterfront restoration inspectors doubled up or overlapped with a DNR inspector at the same launch at the same time. So the goal of that was to maximize coverage, maximize value, and maximize our outreach with the public boaters coming in and out of the watershed district's launches. Most of our shifts started between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. And ended between 3:30 and 6 p.m. On the days that they were scheduled, primarily weekends. So it was almost entirely Friday, Saturday, Sunday shifts, as well as the 3 summer holidays that all fell on Mondays this year. And we did work in a couple random weekday shifts to try and reach some people that may not be boating on the weekends and make sure that we have that point of contact with them if possible. This next slide is a summary of our inspections that were completed by lake and the number of inspection hours by the respective lakes. So the 905 hours that were staffed led to 3,550 individual inspections. We conducted an average of 4 inspections per hour of labor. And then on the pie chart on the right, you can see the breakdown of where those inspections took place as a percentage of the whole. So 43% on Lower Prior Lake, 28% on Upper Prior, 27% on Spring Lake, and then 2% on Fish Lake. And Fish Lake, as you can see in the table to the left, had the fewest amount of inspection hours, so logically the fewest number of inspections, as well as it's a lower trafficked lake than the Prior Lake or Spring Lake launches. So from those 3,550 inspections, I'm able to take the data that's collected and break it down into a couple key elements that I'll present to you guys here in the next few slides. So the first one on the left is the type of watercraft being inspected. 40% of all of the inspections were conducted on fishing boats. 29% were on runabouts or ski boats. So that's a pretty good balance, a better balance than I've seen on some other lakes between fishers or anglers and recreational boats. And then the third and fourth most common there are pontoons at 10%, 11% were personal watercrafts, and another key type of watercraft to call out is the 8% that were wakeboard boats with ballast tanks. And reason for calling that out is that those boats are typically the most challenging to decontaminate and completely drain water out of their ballast tanks. So as inspectors, it's something that we take extra care and attention to make sure that those ballast tanks are fully drained before they leave the lake or before they enter the lake. The pie chart on the right is the response that inspectors were given by the boat owners as far as the time that the watercraft was out of water before entering that lake that they were going into. So the state DNR recommends at least 5 days of dry time to effectively kill and prevent the spread of any invasive species. 70% of the watercraft entering the watershed district launches that were staffed reported being out of water for at least 5 days or more, which is a good sign. 21% said that they were out of water 1 to 4 days. And then the most at risk for spreading AIS responses are those that had been out of the water for less than 24 hours or going from one lake to the next on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or multiple lakes within a given day, just because that risk of transport is much greater and viable from a time out of water and back into water. So 7% of the responses said they had been out of water less than 24 hours. 2 other questions on the survey that are asked of boaters during each inspection is what was the last body of water visited by that watercraft and what is the next body of water that you're planning to visit? And as you can see, the bars there represent the number of responses for each lake, and then the color coding is based on the known infestations in those bodies of water. So Upper Prior, Lower Prior, and Spring Lake were the most common responses for the last body of water visited and the next body of water planning to visit. And those 3 lakes are known to be infested with zebra mussels and Eurasian water milfoil, which is why they are coded in red. And then the other couple lakes to make note of here is that Lake Minnetonka is 4th and 5th in their respective responses. And then some of the smaller lakes in Scott County and Dakota County are there as less common responses. And these 2 tables just show the top 10 responses. One good thing to note here is that we don't see lakes that are infested with starry stonewort as common responses. So I think the closest lake to the watershed district that's known to be infested with starry stonewort is Medicine Lake in Hennepin County, and that's not one of the most commonly visited last or next body of water. So from a risk standpoint, that's good to see. All right, so from our surveys, here are some statistics on the AIS violations. We had 38 entering inspections that found plants on them that were removable by hand, 8 boats that showed up with drain plugs in them, and then 2 that had mud violations. So that was mud somewhere on the trailer, on the watercraft, or on the water equipment. Those violations were resolved before the boat was allowed to enter the body of water, or they were denied a launch. And you can see the breakdown between each of the lakes there, where most of those violations were occurring at Lower Prior Lake and Upper Prior Lake. Exiting findings, we had 334 exiting watercraft that were found to have at least one form of potential AIS identified on them. The breakdown in the chart below is by lake and by type of potential AIS violation. So plants removable by hand is by far the most commonly found potential AIS violation. And by state statute with AIS law, the state doesn't define a plant violation as a native or only an invasive. It encompasses all plants. So there's no differentiated from the state statute whether the plant is invasive or native. Any kind of plant, water, animal cannot be transported from one body of water to the next. So of all these violations, they were resolved on site with our inspectors working collaboratively with the boat owner, or in the case that there was a zebra mussel stuck that would require decontamination, or a plant that was stuck and would require decontamination, they were sent to a decontamination unit that was on site, or given a permit to transport the watercraft one direction. So from point A being the launch to point B where that boat would be thoroughly cleaned and decontaminated. This next slide, the next couple slides, is something that we do additionally for the watershed district in order to help identify those plant species that are being found, since it is such a big number, and there's questions on, well, if we're finding only native plants entering or exiting lakes, what's the difference? So for the last 2 years, I've had an additional internal survey that I've had our inspectors complete that has them take additional questions, and then take a picture and a best guess at to what kind of plant species was found during that inspection process. So this is the responses that we gathered this year. The pie chart in the top left is what lake the inspector was working at when they found the plant. You can see in the pie chart on the right that 94% of the plants that were found were exiting, 6% were entering. And then the bottom pie chart is their best guess at a plant identification. So I say best guess because sometimes it's very difficult to identify a plant species, A, when it's out of water, B, when it's dried, or B or C, when it's mixed with a whole bunch of other different plants. So our inspectors are not necessarily marine biologists. We train them and teach them the different plant species, and we are asking them to give a best guess at identification, but there is potentially a margin of error where they are misidentifying species. So from the plants that they did identify, 23% were identified as Eurasian water milfoil, another 23% were identified as curly leaf pondweed, which are both invasive species. And then the third and fourth most common plants were that 12% there, that was the flat stem pondweed, and then the 10% that was a broad or clasping leaf plant that would be considered a native. This next slide gives you an example of what the inspectors are seeing on site in this plant identification survey. So the two images on the far left, the top left is a entering inspection that took place at Spring Lake, and the inspector found what they suspected was Eurasian water milfoil entering the lake. And this was prevented, pulled off the boat, and a picture was taken for documentation purposes. The lower left-hand picture was entering at Fish Lake, and the inspector suspected flat-stem pondweed, so a native plant, but still something from a state statute standpoint that would be considered a violation of state AIS statute because it was being transported. The second one in from the top left was another entering inspection, and that was at Upper Prior Lake, and the inspector said that it was suspected to be somewhat dried curly leaf pondweed going into Upper Prior. And then the other 5 are all exiting inspections, and just going along the top there, that one with the corner of a folding chair in it is suspected filamentous algae, but you can see that little tan triangle circular shape thing is a zebra mussel attached to the filamentous algae fibers or stuck inside of it. That was pulled off an exiting boat by our inspector, and I don't know exactly where that boat was going to next, but potentially prevented a spread of zebra mussels from Upper Prior Lake to a clean body of water there. Top right is a suspected Eurasian water milfoil being found exiting Lower Prior Lake. The two along the bottom right are suspected curly leaf pondweed exiting Fish Lake, and then also exiting Spring Lake. And then that the last one that I haven't talked about, the second one in on the bottom, it was suspected Eurasian water milfoil exiting Lower Prior Lake. So part of the breakdown of this data and analyzing it for your value was looking at 4-year trends. And we've been hired by the Watershed District for the last 2 years. And then we also did inspections on Spring Lake in 2019. So looking back at the data over the last 4 years, these numbers include all of the inspections that Waterfront Restoration completed, as well as what the DNR completed, because they have had inspectors staffed at Upper Prior Lake and Lower Prior Lake in past years as well. So you can see the patterns or number of inspections stay fairly consistent at Fish Lake. Kind of bounces around a little bit in Spring Lake. Same with Upper, and then you see a big decrease in number of inspections this year over last year on Lower Prior Lake. But overall this year we had about a 26% decrease in number of inspections from last year. Some of that is weather related, where we had an ice off that was, I think, at least 2 or 3 weeks later than it had been the past 2 years, as well as some fairly cold and unfavorable for boating weather this spring that would have lowered our inspection counts in May, as well as less hours. So the bottom couple bullet points there in the slide show that in 2020 we had 900 hours of contracted watercraft inspections. Last year we had 1,000, and this year we did 905 hours. So with less hours of inspections out there, you're obviously gonna have less inspections as well. So it's not just a weather pattern. There's some staffing patterns there and other factors that would lead to that 26% decrease in overall inspections. One thing to highlight, and it is called out in your guys's in the presentation, or excuse me, the report that's in your board packet on page, I think it's 33 or 34, is that the DNR completed 51 decontaminations this year, which was a 54% increase over last year when they completed, I think it was 34 or 35 total. So that's an important partnership where something that I tell my inspectors when they're working, where the DNR is working, so that if they do have someone leaving a lake with a zebra mussel or Eurasian water milfoil that needs a decontamination that they can't successfully remove by hand, that, hey, the DNR is staffed at Lower Prior Lake today with the decontamination unit, send them there, or go have a decontamination. So it's an important partnership, and we were able to get quite a bit more use out of their decontamination services this year because of it. The 4-year trends continued. These two bar graphs show the comparison of Minnesota AIS law violation over the last 4 years. So you can see we've had a fairly steady decrease in the number of entering violations and drain plug violations found. So the most common violation is still plants being found. I think that will probably always be the case. But I do see that there's a trend happening here where either the public is more aware that we're going to have inspectors at the launches and they need to show up and leave clean. And then the other trend that we see and hear oftentimes from inspectors is that earlier in the season, they're not aware of it, they're not familiar with it, or they've forgotten over winter somehow. But then through the education process that our inspectors go through with each interaction, they catch on, and by midsummer, late summer, a lot more of the boats are coming and going with responsible boat owners cleaning them proactively. I think this is my last slide on the 4-year trends. Chart on the left is our comparison of findings at entrance by year by type of potential AIS found, and then the one on the right is the findings at exit by year. And you can see that we've had a significant increase in plants found that were removable by hand in 2022. That's that large yellow bar on the right with 536 findings, and this does include the DNR's data now. And then we were also in that same exiting table that there was more zebra mussels found on exiting inspections. All of those occurred at prior lake launches and were resolved on site or completed with the decontamination. And then on the left, we have the overall reduction in entering violations found, which in my opinion shows signs of more responsible boaters. A couple quick recommendations for future seasons. I would say continue with at least the same level of coverage and maybe even consider more weekday coverage throughout the season mixed in. That could be randomized and even adjusted by time of day, where we could start some shifts earlier at 6 in the morning to potentially hit some of those early morning anglers and schedule some shifts later in the evening to conclude their time at the launch at sunset or at dusk and interact with some of those recreational boaters that may be coming off the lake late at night. One thing also to consider would be expanding inspector coverage to other locations throughout the watershed district. Maybe there's justification for more hours at Fish Lake or some of the other smaller bodies of water within the watershed district. And then another important component to it is always the educational piece. So continuing to provide and refresh educational AIS materials that inspectors can hand out to boaters. I know the eyelids informational card was at the Spring Lake launch this year, and Sean had provided me a copy with it before the season starts so that we could help educate the public on what the eyelids was there. There's plenty of educational material on bait bucket law and stickers and postcards that could be handed out, and then any other educational materials that are an opportunity to inform the public with. One thing that we did proactively this year was that the DNR came out with a lake pledge that basically was a sticker that said, "I pledge to protect our waters from invasive species." And we gave each one of our inspectors these and said to just proactively help ask the public to take the lake pledge. There's a little QR code on it that they could scan, and it basically takes them to the DNR site that says, "I pledge to clean, drain, dry my watercraft before entering or leaving any water access." And then this sticker can go on their trailer's winch post. So brought some extras if you guys want to take a look at them. If you're familiar with them at all, I can pass them around here. But those would be my recommendations for future years. And I just wanted to say thank you to the board for trusting Waterfront Restoration to recruit staff, train, manage our team of dedicated inspectors to help protect the Prior Lake, Spring Lake, Watershed District lakes again this year.
All right, very good report. Thank you very much. I have just one quick question. Did any of your inspectors run into any issues with any of the boaters? I mean, confrontations or people giving them a bad time or anything, or are they pretty much understanding?
I would say 95% of people are really cooperative, understanding, thankful, glad to have someone there helping keep the lakes clean. There's maybe 5% that are impatient, especially at the Prior Lake launches where it's busier and they're trying to get in and out faster, and they're just making kind of rude or short comments like, I don't have time for this, or I don't want to participate. And one thing with the questions that are asked as part of the inspection process is they're voluntary. The boat owner does not have to respond to it. So every once in a while we'll have someone that says, don't bother, don't ask me any questions, but you can look at my boat, because they legally are obligated to do that. But nothing beyond just some impatient and short people with inspectors this year.
Okay. Anybody else got a question? Christian? Oh, Frank?
Yes, I would echo, it was an excellent report, thank you. And I would be in favor, if we could, to increase the weekday coverage, as you say, and maybe in a randomized pattern so that it's not predictable. I was looking at the ILETS data, and there you see, I don't know if those data are correct, but it looks like they have about 2,200 launches on the weekend days and 1,600 on average during the weekdays. So that tells us that during the week, it's like 2/3 as much, which means there's a lot of launches, obviously, during weekdays. So therefore, it is important to be there at those times as well, as much as possible. Thank you.
Yep.
Frank?
Is that green?
Yeah.
Just a couple of questions. One, you did 3,550 total inspections,
Correct.
right, for all 4 lakes?
Yep.
Any idea how big a sample size that is, as against the total number of launches and pullouts? Is it 1%? Is it, any idea? It's got to be pretty minuscule, all things considered, but
Yeah.
maybe I'm wrong.
There's some statistics that say, 55 or roughly that percentage of launches happen on weekends, and then the other 45 or 40% happen on weekdays. But there's no statistical possibility of inspectors inspecting every boat, no matter how much coverage and hours.
We couldn't afford it.
Exactly, and it's not statistically possible. But I don't know if it's
Is it
10%
about
or
5%? 3%? I'm just trying to get some order of magnitude in my head. No idea. Okay.
I can get back to you with see what I can find out, but
I was just
hard to put a number on
curious,
that.
Because then I jump to the number of violations and how we doing? I mean, if you compare this to another community, do they have a whole lot more? Or are the lakes so totally different? The frequency of use so totally different, you can't make a comparison. Man alive, don't go to Prior Lake, they don't care. By the same token, go to Lakeville, they're one lake they really care about.
Sure. I think there's definitely a factor there of traffic to the launch. With a lake like Prior Lake that's very heavy with traffic on weekends, you could probably maximize some of your impact there just by covering more on the weekends versus a lake like Fish Lake that's a little bit slower in traffic. And I believe, if we're doing 1 inspection per hour at Fish Lake or half an inspection, 1 inspection every 2 hours at Fish Lake, we're doing 4 or 5 an hour at Prior Lake. So there's definitely a factor there of traffic. But some of the lakes are self-limiting based on access and parking spaces, whereas Lower Prior Lake is a very big parking lot, and I don't know exactly how many parking spaces for vehicles with trailers, but it's substantially more than Fish Lake or even Upper Prior Lake. So some of that's self-limiting just based on the physical geography and physical space. But yeah, and then just to back up to your previous question, the DNR did about 3,000 of their own inspections this year as well. So with the DNR and our inspectors, we were at 6,400. So
It's a bigger sample.
yeah, bigger sample size for you guys there.
How many entities do you do this work for? You do it for our watershed here. Do you do it for other cities or conservation districts?
Gotcha. We were contracted by 8 different local government units this year.
Do you then, you started to get to it, because I look at this and I go, great information. What do I do with it? I mean, really, I don't know exactly what to do. And if you've got 8 different entities out there, do you have kind of a war chest where you can go, hey, Minnetonka's doing this, this, and this. Prior Lake, Spring Lake Watershed, this, and this. These are the kinds of things that we could, our staff could probably take advantage of, like you talked about with that little sticker.
Sure.
There, that could help us, because now it's not just what we know, we're doing something about it. And I saw you had some recommendations to that effect, too.
Yeah.
But extending that concept, to me, makes a great deal of sense. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. I think the biggest component to it, and it's hard to accurately conceptualize in a report like this, is the educational component. Where we know statistically it's impossible to cover every launch every day and touch every boat coming in and out of a lake. So a main focus of our watercraft inspectors and how they're trained and how we manage them is how they educate the public, so that when an inspector isn't there, that boat owner needs to still comply with state statute and clean, drain, dry their boat, whether an inspector's present or not. And that's where I hope our biggest impact is taking these 344 people that exited the lake with some kind of potential form of AS on it, or the 38 that tried entering with something on it, and saying, you can't do this. You need to clean, drain, dry to be a responsible boat owner, so that the next time I'm coming into this lake and I'm not here, you're going to be able to take care of it on your own.
Not sure I want to ask this question, but I will. So did those 300 and whatever number, did they walk away with a, hey, $30 fine or whatever? Or is it more a warning, or is it a combination of the two?
So the ones that we are able to resolve on site won't lead to a violation. And typically what we have found is that the only ones that are enforceable from a citation standpoint are if they deliberately proceed to launch or exit without complying with an inspection. Because so when you register your watercraft, that's part of what you sign up for, is that you comply with state statute and that you adhere to the watercraft inspection process when an inspector is present. So if they deliberately come in, our inspector stops and says, hi, I'm going to inspect your boat for 3 minutes. They say, skip it, I'm launching. That would be something that we would recall and report in, and hopefully lead to a citation for some level of accountability. The other one that's most commonly able to be enforced is zebra mussel violations. So if a watercraft arrives at a launch with attached zebra mussels, they take that very seriously, and that would likely lead to an enforcement. But if it's sadly, if the law enforcement was trying to enforce 344 people leaving with a single plant on it, they're going to be chasing boats around the state 24/7.
Thank you.
Who do you call for enforcement then? The Scott County Sheriff?
Ultimately, they're the ones that would follow up with it. Our inspectors report it to me. I report it to the DNR, and then the DNR follows their channels of enforcement through the local agencies.
Seems like a lot of reporting. Okay, any other questions from anybody? All good? All right. Well, thank you for another good year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay, with that, I think we're going to go to a kind of another invasive species report with our 2023 ILID program, and there's a vote on this one. And I think Shauna is doing this one, or who?
President Loney, I'm going to take this one.
Okay,
So President Loney and managers. The ILIDS device was initially installed in 2021 based on CAC recommendations. It was, the board authorized for the ILIDS to be used again, installed again this year in 2022. with the understanding that the eyelets device, that any violations that were found really were not going to be enforced. So its primary use was kind of to provide education and encouragement for AIS compliance. Last month, the board did receive a presentation of 2022 activity provided by Environmental Century Protection, who is the manufacturer of the eyelets device. And in your packet this month, you did receive the year-end report from the Environmental Century Protection manufacturer. Staff did reach out to the CAC to receive their recommendations of what they thought, whether eyelets should proceed for 2023. And we actually received a split response from our CAC members. Those who were in favor stated such things such as they do believe that it does encourage appropriate behavior and that the data collected on the boat launch activity from the eyelets device may prove to be helpful down the road. Those who were against continuing on with the eyelets device stated that while it's been up at Spring Lake, it has not stopped AIS from entering the lake, because in that same 2-year period, Spring Lake now does have zebra mussels and Eurasian water milfoil. In addition, those who were against it stated that they felt the funds would be better spent on watercraft inspections versus a passive device. While staff's memo in the board packet does state a recommendation to move forward with eyelids in 2023, also kind of based on the premise that staff would try to find some partners to either help provide a QR code on that sign that would provide some additional education, or to try to reward boat people if the video showed them complying with AIS inspections. Now, I'll be honest, subsequent to the memo, staff has been maybe considering a different recommendation to the board. And we are now probably leaning more towards discontinuing the use of the eyelets device. And that's really based on consideration of the CAC comments, in particular that, while the eyelids, even if it was enforceable, it's an after-the-fact sort of detection. The aquatic invasive species has already entered the lake. And that maybe the idea is that the money spent on eyelids, while not truly that expensive, those funds could fund another 120 to 130 hours of in-person boat and watercraft inspections. So once again, staff is probably leaning towards the recommendation of discontinuing eyelids.
Okay, well, thank you, Joni. And see, so the staff's recommendation now is different than what's in the packet. And just one question I have before I ask my colleagues any questions. It says in the memo that we can sell back the unit to the contractor. Would we be doing that or not?
Per the contract, if we are not going to use the device, it is my understanding, we have the opportunity to sell the device back to the manufacturer. What price we would receive for it, it was not called out in the contract.
It would be safe to say it's less than what we paid for it.
I think that would be a very safe assessment,
Okay.
assumption.
Any other questions on the eyelid?
Is there some minimum span of time we have to give them notice? 60 days, 90 days, half a year?
In terms of the contract?
Yeah, the notification requirements before,
There
or not
is,
in breach.
I think there's, the contract itself expires at the end of this year, or it's actually an annual contract that started in 2021 with the option to renew the contract by the end of the year for the next year.
Is there the data collection that we get from the eyelids? Is that, other than, it gives us a count of the number of launches when there's nobody there to watch. Is there anything that we can do with that data? Is it useful for any reason other than the eyelids counts or for that? I mean, is there any reason to pay for that?
You know, it's just, it does give us some indication of activity out at the launch. Beyond that, and, you know, the number of violations that's happening during that time period.
Okay.
I'm sure some more creative minds than my own might be able to find some other ways to use that data.
Any questions, Christian, Ben, or Matt?
I have none.
None? Okay. Staff's recommendation is not to renew the eyelid project for 2023 and possibly use those funds for additional watercraft inspection. So I hear a motion in that regard.
So moved. Could we also find out what the repurchase price is?
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming it's now the concrete as well as the unit itself, right? Don't the two go together? The footing, that it's,
Manager Boyles, I think the footing is a sunk cost.
okay, thank you.
So it would really just be the actual eyelid device that is mounted to the footing that would be sold back.
Thank you.
Okay. A motion by Frank and
Second?
second? Second it, Matt?
I want a clarification on the,
Okay, did you second the motion first?
I did not.
I need a second. Christian? I haven't.
I did second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So now we can enter discussion. You got a question?
I would not like to see the funds linked to automatically go to additional inspections. I'd like that to be TBD.
Okay. Okay. Any other discussion?
I'll accept that as a friendly amendment if the seconder will.
I agree. Yes.
Okay. The amendment is not to use those funds for additional watercraft inspection or to be determined at a later
TBD.
date. Okay, any other discussions by questions? I'm not hearing any or seeing any, so with that, I assume you're ready to vote. All in favor of the motions and the amendment, say aye.
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 And all in favor or all against, say no. None. Motion carried 5-0. All right, thank you. Now we're going to get into some year-end funding commitments. We got 3 resolutions. The Alum Internal Loading Fund Balance Commitment is Resolution 22-364. We have the Upper Watershed Blueprint Fund Balance Commitment, Resolution 22-365. And we have the Debt Payment Reserve Fund Balance Commitment, Resolution 22-366. Do we need any staff presentation on these?
President Loney, I do just have a few quick comments if.
Yeah, okay, is there any comments? We'll take resolution, yeah, that's in the packet. We'll take resolution 22-364, and essentially, we had money budgeted in the 2022 budget, and we are determining that so much of that hasn't been spent this year, and that is going to go into the of the implementation fund. It's going to go into what we call our alum internal loading reserve. Currently, we have $250,000 that we're going to transfer or commit, and then we'll have a total at the end of this year of $480,000. That's what the resolution 22-364 says. So I need a motion on that regard.
So moved.
Motion by Frank, second by Matt. Any more discussion on the resolution? Not seeing any or hearing any. All in favor of resolution 22-364, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. So now we're going to go to resolution 22-365, which is the Upper Watershed Blueprint Fund Balance Commitment. And again, what is in there is we determined that $172,300 in the implementation fund of this current budget will go into the Upper Watershed Blueprint Reserve, which then will give us a total of $362,300 in that Blueprint Reserve Fund. So do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
resolution? So moved. Frank, approved? Second by Matt. Any more discussion? No discussion? All in favor of Resolution 22-365, say yay.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Same side, motion carried. So now I got to find the other memo. There it is. So it is Resolution 22-366, Debt Payment Reserve Fund Balance Commitment, and we are going to commit $100,000 of that implementation fund for the purpose of a debt payment reserve, and that would be our first payment into that fund. And so the total of that fund would be $100,000 at the end of December 31st, 2022. Do I hear a motion to approve Resolution 22-366?
I'm exhausted. So,
So moved. By the way, you're. Second by Ben. All right. I'm hearing any discussion, any more discussion? None. All in favor of Resolution 22-366, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same side, motion carried. Thank you very much, staff and board members. Okay, so now, boy, the highlight of the day, I think, is going to be the staff Water Resources Conference presentation. Staff did a presentation at the Water Resources Conference this year. Are you going to boogie
keep
there?
the field.
Board President, Loney, managers, we, like Bruce mentioned, had the opportunity to present at the Water Resources Conference October 18th this year, and it was a goal to explain kind of the culmination of the carp management program that's occurred here at the district since before any of us had even started, but we had progressively gotten more into this carp management work and had opportunities through grants and funding to really try new innovative techniques and meet interesting objectives that were just not something that maybe how it was intended to begin with, but we found out and through the results, really interesting results. So this will be the start of the presentation here. So and just to step back, this was presented to an audience of Water Resources peers. So you all have probably heard many times some of this, so we'll try and dive into maybe just a little bit differently what sort of interests and highlights were taken from this project. So and for the audience listening and residents, so Spring and Upper Prior Lakes were impaired for excess nutrients. The 2012 TMDL specifically mentions rough fish as a contributor to this internal phosphorus loading, which is about 50% of the budget on both of these lakes. In that bottom left picture, you'll see, what that would have looked like in 2012. So very familiar and not very pleasant to recreate in. In 2012, carp became a focus. In 2015 through 17, the IPM, Integrated Pest Management Plan, was developed to look at this problem holistically and to solve it through creative means. In 2019, we were awarded the Federal Clean Water Act Section 319 grant, as well as the Bowser Metro Watershed-Based Funding Grant that really sparked some of these innovative techniques, as well as the accelerated carp management funding through the district. The IPM was really the basis for this project, and it identified 3 main ways to help solve the carp: through tracking, blocking, and reducing biomass. Something I'll back up here. Part of these grants were to, part of the measurable goals were to not only reduce phosphorus, but increase aquatic plant abundance. And we'll describe that later and how that's kind of an interesting correlation or result of the carp management.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the first prong of our IPM approach, which is tracking. And the first step in any sort of carp management project is to get a good population assessment. You have to know where you are to know where you're going, I think is the saying. And then we also use population assessments to sort of check in over time and track our progress. And this is done by district staff as well as consultants using a variety of methods, including electrofishing, catch per unit effort, or CPUE surveys, as well as mark and recapture efforts and trap netting. Another method for tracking is pit tags, and these are little tags about the size of a grain of rice, and we implant these in a pretty large amount of carp, and then we can use that information to monitor their movement between water bodies. We install antennas throughout the district, and there's sort of passive data collection. As the carp that are pit tagged go past one of the antennas, we get a ping, we can ID the specific tags, we know where it was implanted, and all that. And then the picture in the middle is at Manager Burnett's house. Thank you very much for that. At that particular pit station, which is along the channel between Spring and Upper Prior Lake, we have 2 antennas, and that helps us determine not only when the fish are going by, but also what direction they're heading in, which is useful for migration information. And information that we've obtained through years of pit data has been used in the past to determine ideal barrier locations and identify potential changes in their migratory behavior. And we've also used that to determine potential bluegill stocking locations. Another method of tracking is radio tag tracking. These are much larger tags, and these are tags that we can track more specifically. You maybe have seen us out there with our little alien-like antennas flailing around on our boat. So yeah, the goal is to have 7 to 10 active tags in each lake, and we use these to determine in-lake behavior and identify potential aggregations. So we do tracking during all seasons. And you can see in the maps that Shauna made below, using many years of tracking data, there's a substantial shift in where they aggregate during the winter and summer. And having that information and that backlog of data really helps us make decisions depending on the time of year for removal efforts. We also track more visually. So we have motion activated cameras that will give us a notification when there's activity. So we'll place them at streams where we know carp are typically active. So sometimes we'll get a ping and we'll get cool carp footage, and we'll be able to go out and do something about it. Other times, at the very least, you get a cool image of a bird. Or one time this summer, some kids making funny faces at you, so keeps it interesting. And then we also have our carp espionage program, which is a program that we developed at the district, and that really involved the community. It's sort of an example of keeping them directly involved rather than just informed. So they can submit sightings of carp activity through an app called Survey 123, and then we get an email notification of that activity right away. So we put an extra emphasis on this for residents who live on the lakes, and also put an extra emphasis during spawning season, because that is, obviously it's very easy activity to spot, as well as a time for a lot of removals. The second prong of our IPM approach is to block, and this is done for 2 primary purposes. One, to sort of contain the existing population, and two, to block their spawning areas and prevent recruitment. As of 2021, we had 6 barriers, most of which are permanent. And another way that we sort of physically block recruitment is to focus some removal efforts before and during spawning season. Obviously, if you remove the carp before they can spawn, that prevents more spawning. So we did have a lot of luck with that this year. The video in the middle is taken at the Arctic Lake inlet into, or the Arctic Lake channel, where it enters into Prior Lake, Upper Prior Lake. So we had a lot of luck there this year with blocking off that stream and going in with a variety of netting and electrofishing methods. We did remove a fair amount of poundage from there. So that's just one example. Another way that we block is through biological recruitment prevention. We partnered with a U of M study in 2017. One of our wetlands was used as one of their 4 basins in that study. And it was used to assess the effectiveness of bluegill as a biocontrol because they do eat carp eggs. It was a very successful study with 0% recruitment in our wetland. And we continue to use bluegill stocking as recruitment prevention. We stock 2 to 3 basins per year. And that is also sometimes done in partnership with some of our local partners, including the Prior Lake Association, Spring Lake Association, and Prior Lake Rotary. So we're very grateful for that. And then we track the effectiveness and success of those efforts through trap netting and pit stations, which will tell us if we have young of year, how the bluegill population is doing, and we'll also see migration. So it all kind of comes together.
Alrighty, so the last part of our IPM plan is to reduce the carp population within the watershed. We have a variety of methods that we use to remove carp from the watershed. It ultimately is determined by the season and current lake conditions. So thinking about a drought or if there's ice on the water, that definitely makes a difference for how we want to go about removing fish. Just for example, we've got baited box traps in the summer. We've got the open water, open shoreline, works great. One trap that we love to highlight is the Anderson trap. It's a specialized trap that Jeff came up with. On the bottom left there, it acts both as a trap and as a blockage, basically. When carp are spawning in the spring, they can't get up to that wetland, and instead they get trapped in that little box. So we also utilize electrofishing. This is a picture of that same thing Elizabeth was just talking about. We really utilize carp espionage at this location, so backpack electrofishing and with the boat works really well there. And then in the winter and in the fall, we utilize commercial netters, consultants, and staff time to conduct open water and under ice seines. So to pull this all together, we kind of have a case study here. This is a heat map of Upper Prior Lake carp locations. This is just during the winter months, and it's over the course of 6 years. So you can see kind of where carp like to hang out. And on this particular day, the carp are hanging out where these blue dots are. One particular thing about this is, so on the farthest east, so all the way to the right, those are the carp we are going after. And that area is not particularly conducive to seining, so it's very shallow, and there's lots of rocks and things. So we wanted to get them over to that other side, a little bit more left to there. So what we did is, with the help of commercial netters and consultants, we strung a seine net 3/4 of the way around the total area that we wanted to seine them out. We then put in a block net, and then these are little triangles for the underwater speakers where we play crazy loud music, something that we think carp don't like. And the hope is that we'll scare the carp away from there, hit the block net, and they'll go right into that red zone where we want them. So these are live animals, and they do what they want, and this kind of stuff takes time. So essentially the fish kind of scattered a little bit, but a majority of them did seem to go into the seine net area. So we were able to close that off. And in this particular removal event, we removed about 5,700 pounds of carp. And this is a really cool example of the modified unified method. It's kind of a newish upcoming carp strategy. Basically, it's combining netting and herding techniques to concentrate carp into a specific capture zone. So we'll dig into results. There's 3 parts of results we'll talk about. First one is just general carp populations. So we're looking at Upper Prior Lake. In blue is the total pounds of carp removed from Upper Prior Lake. And then in red, we have the carp population in kilograms per hectare. And the black solid line is that solid base level that we want the carp populations to be at. So you can see over time, the carp population is decreasing along with our carp populations removed. Over half of our total removals on Upper Prior Lake were from non-commercial netting techniques. So for example, just in 2022, this spring, all of our carp removed were from electrofishing or from that one spot on Arctic and Pryor. So that was pretty cool. On Spring Lake, this is kind of an interesting story. You can see we had a lot of early success. We had some really large successful seine events in the very beginning, and that seemed to make quite a dent on the carp population estimate. We're assuming that, or our best guess is that at the time we didn't have all of our barriers put in quite yet, and also the carp behavior started changing, especially in the winter. They weren't aggregating in the same places that were conducive to successful seine areas. So the carp population was actually able to rebound quite a bit, and this is just a really good example of the importance of continued carp management over time. Next, we'll talk about water quality results. So there's a lot going on in this graph, but we're essentially looking at total phosphorus and water clarity, as well as those dashed lines stand for the standards for each of those. The little symbols are kind of the purpose of this graph, so each of the symbols stands for a different type of water quality project that may have impacted the water quality. So we've got alum treatments, carp removals, barriers, and various other water quality projects across the watershed. So this just goes to say, well, you can see from 2019 to 2021, we've had awesome water quality results. They're starting to meet standards, and this is due to a number of factors and efforts from the watershed. Super similar story here on Spring Lake. We've just, in recent years, started meeting water quality standards quite consistently, and this is due to a number of different factors. Last, I will just quickly talk about plant growth. It's something that's important for long-term lake health. So the way that we measure plant growth is with plant area coverage. This is the percent of the lake bottom that has aquatic plants, and ideally we want this number to be at about 40%, and that's where they'll start sustaining that long-term lake health on their own. Since the carp grant period, we've seen a dramatic increase in plant growth. You can see here on this plant density map from 2016 to 2021. Spring Lake has increased from about 10% to 30% plant area coverage. So we're definitely getting closer to that 40% goal. Similar story on Upper Prior Lake. We've seen an increase from less than 10%, only seeing vegetation in Mud Bay, all the way up to over 50% these days. So this is because as water quality improves, we see the lake becomes more clear and light can penetrate deeper in the water. Plants can grow at greater depths.
So this brings us to the end, and some of the lessons that were learned during this. Really the biggest one was that a multifaceted approach provided results, and that was really following that integrated pest management plan, blocking, tracking, removing, diversifying removal techniques, and getting the community involved. The carp espionage program was just kind of icing on the cake at the end here when we started finding alternative ways to remove carp, getting the residents involved and them pointing to us and saying, hey, there's carp at this location, and us having the ability to get out there within the day or the next day really shined a light on some of the actions that brought us here. We also learned that this is a long-term project. Spring Lake, we didn't have the barriers involved or fully secured, and at that time it allowed rebound. But what we're seeing now, post barrier installations is that the barriers are working, carp are beginning to spawn in lake. That's not their preferred habitat. And that's where predators hang out. There are bluegill populations within the lake, and so the population dynamic is changing, and that's kind of within the next steps. And so also setting expectations. This was interesting to present. The expectations that we need to set are with you, the Board of Managers, and that there's we provide the IPM plan, but we also say, hey, we're going to seine carp, but it's not always successful, and we need to explain how that works and have the managers help us, steer us in the right direction. So yeah, success is variable. And what's next? Upper Prior Lake is looking good, and it's on track to reaching that 100 kilograms per hectare ecological threshold. We made a good dent in it this year, and after we get there, it'll be what we call entering the maintenance mode. But really, it's going to be focusing on Spring Lake. It's at a high biomass right now, and we're working with population changes and how to remove them. So, but we're really finding out what's working and what's not. And through some of these creative ideas and funding that led to really good results, and we're pretty proud to be able to show that. That's the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, do we clap now? Or? Good job, you guys. And I know you guys have learned a lot. Like you said, you learned what not to do, probably. And I think we had this discussion last year about trying seines when you felt like I shouldn't try it. But I think we would like, as a board, at least I feel most of the board members would like to see a try to see if we can, otherwise if you don't try, you never know what you're going to get. So, any questions for the staff here on this presentation? Everybody okay? All right. Well, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
All right, we're going to Treasurer's Report. Christian.
Yes, thank you. Our finances are on target, below budget, and we did receive our second tax payment from Scott County, $860,000 in December 1st. That's not in the handout that you have today. We are close to closing Old National and Sterling Bank accounts with all funds transferred to 4M. Yes, I think that's it. Any questions?
Any questions for Christian? I have just one comment, I think. We passed 3 resolutions on commitments. I don't know what the total is exactly, $172,250, plus about $525,000. So that would change our restricted, in the cash flow chart. We show so much money in, I think it's 942,723 in the committed restricted fund. So that would increase by 525,000, I believe, after the resolutions we passed. You follow? I think that's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, so right now our total restricted funds as of December 1st, I believe, is 808,000. And then I think we are moving some of those funds around. Is that correct?
So President Weiser and managers, President Loney and managers, Oh, my apologies.
I may be a miser, but that's not my name.
In a different way.
Yeah, a different way.
So you are correct, President Loney. Another $500,000 will be added to that restricted fund balance. And, so that, if you're looking at our cash flow, that will basically take that gray bar and bump it up another 500,000. So those are funds that are dedicated to very specific purposes, leaving the kind of the dollar value on top of that, the blue, to be able to cover our day-to-day operating expenses.
And that'll show up at our next treasurer's report as well. Though.
That is correct.
Okay, that's the only question I had. Good job, Christian.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so moving on then, if there's no other questions on the treasury report, we're moving to the consent agenda. And on the consent agenda, we have meeting minutes of November 15, 2022 board workshop, meeting minutes of November 15, 2022 board meeting, meeting minutes October 27, 2022 CAC meeting, claims list and visa expenditure summary, 2022 district administrator PTO carry forward, and the Johnson Estates conservation easement. Is there any item that anybody wishes to remove from the consent agenda? Not seeing any. I need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Matt,
Second.
second by Christian. No discussion yet, so let's vote. All in favor of the consent agenda, please say yay.
Yay.
Aye. And opposed? Motion carried 5-0. Well, that brings us to pretty much to the end of our meeting. I would just go through the update meeting and event schedule. We have a Prior Lake Outlet Channel Cooperators meeting this Thursday at noon at the Prior Lake City Hall here, Parkview Conference Room. Our next meeting for the Board of Managers Workshop is January 10th, 2023 at 4 p.m. And then our regular meeting will be January 10th at 6 p.m. The CAC's next meeting is January 26th at 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Prior Lake City Hall. With that, I look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Christian, second by Matt. All in favor to adjourn, say aye. 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 Opposed? Motion carried 5-0. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.